I'm Tyler Bugg and work with the team at Tech NYC. For those of you who are new to Tech NYC, we're the nonprofit membership organization that represents about 800 tech companies and startups across all 5 boroughs of New York City. And our membership includes all the largest tech employers in the city, Facebook, Google, and the like, all the way down to brand new startups and everything in between. And we're really working with that community to make sure the innovation economy in New York City thrives and to sort of mobilize the resources of the tech community to ensure that New York City remains the best place to build and grow a tech company. So one of the things I like to say is that we care about the NYC side of Tech NYC as much as we care about the tech side of Tech NYC. And by doing a lot of the work that really makes sure New York City is a place where tech leaders want to live and work, we weigh in often on issues that have to do with the infrastructure of the city and with the health and vibrancy of the city. So with that in mind, of course, one of the sectors that really undergirds a lot of New York City's infrastructure is the restaurant and hospitality industries. And so we wanted to have a conversation on what's next for that sector, given everything going on in the world. So to sort of jumpstart that conversation, we are so excited to be joined by Andrew Rigie, who is the executive director of the New York City Hospitality Alliance, which is an association representing the restaurants and nightlife venues throughout the 5 boroughs. He's also the chair of the advisory board for the New York City's Office of Nightlife, and also on the leadership of Community Board 7 in Manhattan. And then with him will be Nabeel Alamgir, who is the co-founder and CEO of Lunchbox, a collection of digital ordering platforms that are for restaurants and built by restaurateurs. And before that, he had lots and lots of jobs at Bear Burger and was most recently their chief marketing officer. So wanted to turn it over to them and have a little bit of conversation with them. And then we'd love to just open it up to the floor and have a really free-flowing conversation with all the folks on the call today. So with that in mind, I would love to hear, maybe we can start with Andrew, just to sort of set the stage a little bit pre-pandemic actually. Before the outbreak started, can you just give us a little bit of an overview of how much the restaurant industry plays into New York City's larger economy? How important is that role and size in terms of the number of jobs it provides, the revenue it provides, things like that?
Sure. Well, thanks, Tyler, for having me. Hi, everyone. Good to be here. So yeah, I always say that the city's restaurant and nightlife industry is vital to not only the economic fabric, but also the social and cultural fabric of the city of New York. So pre-pandemic, there were more than 25,000 eating and drinking establishments throughout the 5 boroughs. That's basically the technical term, so to speak, for restaurants and bars or any of these establishments serving food. And they employed more than 300,000 people. Now, we are 6+ months into the pandemic, which is just crazy to even say. We don't know exactly how many establishments have permanently closed. We suspect the number is in the thousands, but the way that the city calculates the number of permits, it's hard to tell at this point. We do know from labor data that there's still approximately 150,000 New Yorkers that worked in food and drink places pre-pandemic that are still out of work. So it's a significant number. It's a big concern. But I always said, going back to kind of being part of the fabric of the city, I remember years ago speaking with someone who was a biotech firm, and they were saying one of the reasons that they were coming to New York City was because if they wanted to attract the best and brightest coders and engineers, many of those people wanted to be in a city that had, great restaurants, great nightlife, and a really kind of vibrant city life where they could come, be creative, have a nice social life, and potentially even, create a family. So we are tied into so many different aspects of the economy that I don't see how the city of New York recovers unless the restaurant and nightlife industry is at the core of that recovery. And we can certainly get into what that exactly means in a bit, but that's a quick overview. And as far as the recovery goes, which we could certainly talk a little bit more in detail about, it's going to be interesting because it is so uncertain. It's based on so many different factors. But one thing that we know is we need people in New York City, the 70 million annual tourists that came here every year, and so many obviously people in the tech sector and from every sector that just go out and enjoy good meals, good drinks, and want to socialize with their friends and family. And that's why, again, it's not just a regular industry sector. It doesn't matter what industry you're from, you can probably relate to food and restaurants and the socialization that happens with those establishments.
Yeah, that makes sense. And maybe Nabeel, you can add, Andrew, you can weigh on this one too, but Nabeel as well, can you give us a little bit more of a map of the ecosystem of the restaurant industry in New York? When we think about restaurants in New York, we think about, of course, like a pretty complex and diverse ecosystem of like cafes and coffee shops and small independent restaurants, but also all of the big chains that are here too. And they sort of all are here together and all play a role together. Can you sort of like give us a map of what that looks like?
Absolutely. First of all, thank you so much for having me. Andrew, very excited to share the panel with you, follow you and everything you're doing for the space. So appreciate it. In terms of the landscape, I'll share the national landscape and it's very close to New York City. And Andrew, please correct me if in terms of New York City, if I'm sharing anything that's too far off. But nationally, there's around 650,000 restaurants. So these are pre-pandemic numbers, right? We're not 100% sure about the numbers right now. In August, we know that 90% of New York City restaurants did not pay their rent. So we are still in a limbo in terms of the exact numbers. But nationwide, we have 650,000 restaurants. Half of them are QSR, a multi-unit, if you will, and the other half are less than 3 locations. So that's how the country is divided, 50-50 between 1 to 3 versus 3 and above, right? 3 and above could be anyone. It could be like Bear Burger, a 50-unit chain, or it could be Chipotle. Right, so that's the landscape nationally. And what we're noticing is and everyone is aware of this, I'm sure, but the restaurants that are less than 3 locations, the SMB, the mom and pops, if you will, are suffering the most. Right, they are the ones who have the least funding, the least PE money, the least technology in place, and they're also the ones who are getting the least favorable terms from the only place you get revenue from right now, which is Grubhub and DoorDash and Uber Eats, right? So they're the larger you are, and when I was at Bear Burger, we certainly did this. The larger you are, the better rate you get. The problem is that's the need is the opposite. The mom and pops need a break more than the chains do, right? The 3 chains who are thriving right now are all top chains: McDonald's, Chipotle, and Domino's, right? These are the chains that are thriving, and we're picking these chains over local eateries. So it's a 50-50 split, and we're seeing how we can go ahead and help and contribute to the smaller restaurants. And one last thing I'll add, it has been documented last month that there's now 100,000 ghost kitchens in the country. These are independent ghost kitchens. We certainly have some brands like that out of West Coast that don't have a single storefront, but these are also existing concepts that are now going into virtual. One of our customers, David Chang's Fuku, all his restaurants are closed, but he is going virtual with Reef, right? Similarly, we've seen 100,000 of these restaurants pop up, and we think that number will only grow because the restaurant industry was hit really hard from this, right? That's the understatement of the year. But more importantly, we will never let this happen to us again, right? We will never get into just this expensive leases, 10-year commitment, this heavy, testing, if you will, right? We want something leaner. We want a third floor virtual concept to see if the area even wants my food, right? So I think more and more virtual concepts will pop up. So 650K plus another 100K in virtual.
Great.
Yeah.
So given the diversity of the restaurant industry and the ecosystem here in New York, I wanted to get into a little bit of how that interplays with government. Of course, there's a complex set of laws and regulations that restaurants have to abide by in the city. But what does that actually look like? What's the closest that New York City government has or New York State government has to like a department of restaurants that tells restaurants what they can and can't do to operate in the city?
While he's getting back up, I just wanted to add one fun fact, and I'll stop at that. Just this past weekend, New York City restaurants were fined at $150,000 just this weekend. A couple of them were because of not using the right heat lamp, a couple of them because of not using their parking spaces probably for indoor dining. But not only is, to what Andrew was trying to, and I'll let Andrew finish, not only is there not a proper governance in terms of, supporting the hospitality systems out there, there's also a lot of new rules and a lot of fines, but the restaurateurs themselves are not, they're scrambling, right? They're scrambling to, there's, as you guys have read, shortage of heat lamps in New York, and you're also getting fined for the heat lamps you have already, right? So this past weekend, it was at $150,000 in fines. And we just, don't think that's fair during this climate. Andrew, I'm sorry, I was buffering.
No, thanks for jumping in. How's that? Is that better?
That is
perfect.
That is better for me. But so that means, Andrew, I'm gonna ask you to just go back and do the Cliff Notes version of everything that you've already just said about,
you got it.
About the city and
think
permitting.
About that. I'm on a Tech NYC call and my internet connection's bad.
Oh, trust me, it happens to Tech NYC just as much. Don't you?
Yeah. Well, it's like the home, they're learning. All the kids are all on Zoom in the other room, so everyone's pulling, I guess.
Right.
So anyway, so over the years, starting back with the Bloomberg administration, we were involved. They created the business acceleration team. And the idea was basically to bring representatives from all the different agencies that regulate restaurants. So the health department, Department of Buildings, fire department, et cetera, and bring them into one room, create one point of contact. So if I'm a restaurant trying to open up, I can go to one person instead of having to deal with 6 different agencies on 12 different topics. And then you kind of get lost in the, jumble of all of it. And it's been good, but there's been a lot of problems as well over the years. And the de Blasio administration came in and they made some changes. And now there's different areas. You have the Department of Small Business Services. Within that, you have the acceleration team, which I think has a new name, but then you also have the Office of Nightlife. And obviously the distinction between what is restaurants and what is nightlife is often blurred. Then you have state laws. The state labor laws tend to be very challenging, very complex, where a minor technical violation can result in, major financial liability for a restaurant, enough so to just put it out of business, even when there aren't like gross misjustices of the law. And then we've seen over the past 5 years, 10 years, the city council has really got more involved in labor type of laws, which has posed a lot of challenges. So much so that the Department of Consumer Affairs is now the Department of Consumer Affairs and Work or something. And they have a whole department enforcing their own city laws, like paid sick leave, like fair scheduling laws if you're a fast food restaurant. So it can get very complicated as a restaurant owner to figure out all the different laws, reaching out to all the different agencies. And we think that we could further build on and enhance the programs that the city has created by really focusing and giving more dedicated resources to these restaurants. And that's not to say the city hasn't made advances doing that, but like anything else, it can always be enhanced. And moving forward, coming out of or in the midst of and coming out of this pandemic, I think that's going to be more important than ever.
Yeah, and have you seen some like really notable sort of changes in that bureaucracy that you're talking about since the pandemic happened? There were some steps that the city took to sort of like try to expedite a lot of the permitting protocols that they have, particularly around like sidewalk and street dining. How helpful has that been? What else still needs to be done on those fronts?
Yeah. Well, I think what's so interesting, and I say it on all these Zooms, Churchill has that famous quote, "Don't let a good crisis go to waste." And I think the outdoor dining really has taken this crisis and implemented something that makes the city more resilient, supports small businesses, and shows that so much of the bureaucracy, so much of the expense, so much of the red tape restaurants used to get caught up in was unnecessary. And I say that because the application process going for a sidewalk cafe could take months and months and months. It was so expensive. But all of a sudden, like this, the city stood up this outdoor dining program where you don't require an architect to self-certify or to certify your outdoor dining plans. You don't need them to create the renderings of them. You basically self-apply online, self-certify, you meet all the requirements, and boom, you're up operating your sidewalk cafe, and it works beautifully. Yes, there are bumps in the rollout of the program. It happened fast. These are all things to look at and that need to be adjusted. But as a general idea, the multiple months it took to apply, the thousands upon thousands of dollars it took to get these sidewalk cafes were all basically tossed out. So all the things that we talked about that cost so much money, made it so difficult to get a sidewalk cafe, were basically tossed out during the pandemic. And now any restaurant owner, you can go right online, you put in some basic information, you self-certify, and you basically start serving outside. So it shows that we can do things much quicker, and all this bureaucracy and red tape is not needed.
Yeah, did you want to add to that, Nabeel?
I just wanted to add one thing, and you bring up a great point, Andrew. That, there was so much red tape, right? There was so much red tape, and things have moved so much quicker because we had to, right? We realized that time is of the essence, and these restaurants are on the clock, right? I'm reading so many different reports, but the last number I read was around 100,000 restaurants closed permanently, right? I don't know how many of that is in New York, but 100,000 nationwide. So we're against the clock, right? In terms of getting restaurants up and running. The same thing is happening in technology. So just like, dine-in and in-store experience got hit the hardest, the same thing is happening digitally as well in terms of your technology stack as well. Restaurant people are, I believe, the most resilient people, the grittiest people. A lot of immigrants in there, a lot of first-time entrepreneurs, and first-time business accountants, first-time hiring manager, first-time everything. So these people are incredible. They will fight and get through anything, right? They're just incredible people. When this has happened, they have decided, hey, we're going to do everything we need to in store, but so will we make sure that our digital acumen has increased significantly. So everyone is now figuring out, hey, stuff that Domino's and Panera had, how do we get that? How do we get that quickly? How do we go ahead and have 50% digital ordering from our website and 50% from Grubhub, where they're stealing 30% of that fees, right? How do we go ahead and come to some kind of a balance between the two? Because the split before the pandemic was 90-10. Among all digital orders, 90% would come in from a third-party system and 10% would come in directly from your website, because it was never so important, right? The goal was keep people dine in, 70% dine in, and the remaining 30% will be digital. We don't really care about it. The numbers are very confusing. Grubhub is sending you orders, like they're sending you your money by line item. It's not aggregated. It's all very confusing. You know what? To heck with it. It's a discovery channel. Let me just focus on dine-in. So when dine-in disappeared, what restaurant folks did was they became super tech savvy very, very quickly. And I say this to all restaurant partners. It's no longer an option for you to be tech savvy. You have to pick a partner. It doesn't have to be Lunchbox. It could be Chow Now, which you can get up and running in a month. Super affordable. It could be Bbot. It could be anything out there. It doesn't matter. You need, just like you need, if you were able to have a sidewalk seating, you would do it, regardless of, what kind of table did you get on time? What kind of heat lamp did you get on time? Similarly, you need to go ahead and have a tech stack. You no longer can be as stubborn as we as restaurant people used to be, which is not so ready to go ahead and invest in omnichannel experience. So we're seeing this in dine-in. We're seeing this digitally as well.
I think Nabeel's spot on that point as well. Just the nature of the restaurant business. It's nights, weekends, holidays. You're working 24/7. There's always a fire to put out. And then all of a sudden, for the first time ever, right when places got shut down, I'm speaking with these restaurant people, and it was like the first time that they could actually sit for a minute. And it was obviously an incredibly difficult situation, but like step back and look at their business. And I was saying, it's like, you can't change the tires on a moving car. But now that we're at a stop sign or a stoplight, like, let's open the hood, let's look under the hood, being the metaphorical restaurant, and see what can we do to enhance our business moving forward. And I think a lot of people started looking at different areas of their business, including delivery and takeout, because we had our indoor and outdoor dining operations limited for months and months and months. It wasn't until June that we got basically outdoor dining, and then it was just September 30th
when we started opening indoors at only 25% occupancy. So the survival of our business in many ways relied on us pivoting, there's that word, our business model, to start looking at generating different streams of revenue. And takeout and delivery is something that they obviously could do, but the challenge there was so many, or I should say one or two of the, maybe a couple more of the major players took huge percentages and engaged in other types of business practices that really made it difficult for restaurants to operate. And they were starting to look at, how can I work with third-party delivery partners that have a different model where they're not taking 30% of each order. They're not keeping my customer data. They are basically just creating the infrastructure to allow me to conduct these transactions, to post our menus, without kind of almost owning all aspects of the delivery channel. And I think many restaurants have been doing that. They have been looking towards some of the larger restaurant companies that have been a little bit more sophisticated when it comes to the types of technology they are using. But, people were not on the restaurant dining floor. They were often at home, and they were using technology to communicate with their teams and figuring out how they could use technology to really enhance their business operations. And I think we're going to continue to see it. I think there were areas that tech companies have been trying to get into for years. Some restaurants were adopting them, but I mean, look at like mobile menus. Now every restaurant almost you go to, there's a QR code, boom, you scan it with your phone and the menu pops up. COVID did for mobile menus what no mobile menu marketing could ever have accomplished.
Mhm.
That makes sense. I want to just circle really back to the start of outdoor dining earlier in the summer real quick. Let me know if you think this assessment is wrong, but one of the sort of like externalities of the fact that the permitting process was expedited and restaurants could now just like put a little bit of information, self-certify, and boom, they were good to go, was that they then had to sort of more reactively rely on further guidance about the very specific ways that they were allowed to operate either on the street space or on the sidewalk space. And so I think instead of there being like a real comprehensive package of guidance that came from, I don't know, you tell me, the mayor's office or from city or state government leaders, we ran into a sort of like kick the can down the road, path of questions about like how they could operate, what they could serve, some changing rules around, for example, not being able to serve drinks without serving food on the same ticket. Little things like that restaurants have to like constantly keep up with the changing rules on. Is that assessment right? Is that how restaurant owners are feeling about how the outdoor dining stuff rolled out? Maybe grateful for the fact that they were able to like scale it up so quickly, but kind of playing catch up with what all the rules are throughout the summer. Like what's that dynamic?
So one of the big challenges, and this was early on, so about 3 days after the outdoor dining was approved and rolled out and approved, their city made some retroactive changes to the width of the barriers for safety precautions. But that had been after restaurants had invested a lot of money on setting up all these outdoor dining spaces. It was a safety issue. We get it. Safety always needs to be at the forefront. But it was a big problem. I mean, people had no money at all. They felt like they were misled, and they were, because they were told they can do one thing. They did that thing. And then all of a sudden, inspector came and said, you have 24 hours or you're basically going to lose this privilege. And the wording on those letters was done in a way that seemed to be combative, a little bit confusing. So that was definitely a problem. After the 3 or 4 days, whatever the time frame was in which they changed the requirement, from that time on, people, if they followed the requirements, they should have been set up properly. It doesn't excuse what happened at first. That certainly was a problem. The other thing you get into when you do a self-certification, of course, is that if you just self-certify and you just set up, you read something improperly or you make a small mistake and inspector comes out and says, well, why'd you do this? Why didn't you do that? I think in retrospect, if you had more time, what you would do is you'd still allow people to self-certify, and it could be a self-certification upon approval. So you self-certify, you meet all these requirements. Perhaps inspector still reviews all of your plans, but then gives you an okay and says, what you submitted is accurate, it meets all of the requirements, you're good. And then you build it out. Instead of self-certifying, you think you meet these requirements, you set it up, an inspector comes up and says, no, you did that wrong. So I think still allowing people to self-certify, but having some sort of sign off by the city before you invest and build out this infrastructure would be incredibly helpful. Then you also have the difference between city and state law. And obviously we've seen a lot of that where the state says one thing, the city says another thing, and there's this back and forth, and then the restaurant owners are kind of caught in the middle. So you mentioned, Tyler, the requirement that you must order a food item with alcohol. That certainly changed the whole entire dynamic of how you have to run your restaurant. And it created a lot of confusion, a lot of frustration. People didn't understand it in many ways. And there were several other executive orders from the governor where I think some people felt confused, frustrated, and like their voice maybe was not being heard, and they were trying to do everything right. And like, no matter what they did, trying to do things right, they were still getting punished somehow. So I think it is a delicate balancing act of ensuring public health and safety and also ensuring we can get the economy moving again. And my hope would be is that moving forward, when we start to look at things like outdoor dining becoming a permanent part of the city streetscape, that a lot of these issues are thought through in a more detailed manner and then rolled out, so we can be more proactive instead of reactive. And it's a pandemic, so you're reacting to a lot, but it certainly doesn't excuse things that don't make any sense or create unnecessary burdens on restaurants when they have the weight of the world on their shoulders already.
Yeah, to pick up on that outdoor dining point, I think there was a lot of political back and forth, but we finally arrived to the point where outdoor dining was named a sort of permanent fixture that we can expect to see in New York City, even through the winter months. And of course, lots of implications for how restaurants get prepared for that. But I want to just sort of take the restaurant industry hat off and like think about sort of now restaurants being a more permanent part of our streetscapes. Let's skip ahead to when and if, but let's hope when we get to a post-pandemic point, and both street traffic and foot traffic in the city picks back up to what pre-pandemic levels were. Do you think that New York City is going to be able to sustain and continue to operate in an efficient way more restaurants taking up sidewalk and street space when that traffic gets back to the levels that it was before the pandemic started? Like, is there a way to like make all of that happy and balanced?
Yeah,
I would,
oh, go ahead, Nabeel.
I would love to give someone from the outside, right? Someone not looking at all the regulations. I'd love to give that feedback, and then Andrew to add his point to see how far away are we. And I hope we are, or maybe not. But if you guys have been to the city, there's some parts that don't look great, right? It looks empty, but there are some parts that look fantastic, right? It is absolutely like there's people on the street. Every restaurant has seats. It looks like a different place, and we shouldn't give back our streets, right? After the pandemic, and I think the way we do that is, and this is what I'm assuming will happen from not knowing any of the information that Andrew knows, and I would love to hear his say. The reason I think that we will I think it'll be permanent in terms of the outdoor dining experience, because a lot of restaurants will permanently close. A lot of our favorite restaurants, I'm sure everyone here, at least one of all our favorite restaurants are no longer operating, right? And I think for us to get back to pre-pandemic number, we need to give restaurants a fighting chance, cut down on the red tape. Let's not bring them back. Let's not bring all of it back. Let's go ahead and make outdoor seating a little bit more accessible. And I think this winter will be super rough, especially with the second wave. And I think restaurants will invest in enclosures and in systems where outdoor dining can go ahead and be a little bit better, because that 25% dining is not changing, right? I don't think it's getting anything more than 50%. And as all the reports have come out, even at 75%, indoor dining, it's not enough for restaurants to survive, because just because you have seating doesn't mean people are coming to eat, right? So we have to, be careful about that as well. So I don't know what the response is, but I hope we go ahead and build systems and build things in place where we're not going back exactly to how it was pre-pandemic. And would love to hear from Andrew what his take is.
Yeah. Going back to that quote, don't let a, crisis go to waste, is we have an opportunity to reimagine our city, right? This is once in 100 years. So it's not just restaurants, it's normal retail, it's tech, it's housing, it's the environment, it's all of these aspects where society intersects. And are we going to use the momentum and the political will to make big changes to our city? And I would argue that outdoor dining, making it permanent, basically allowing every restaurant almost to have outdoor seating by taking away parking spots, giving them to restaurants to set up, even to other types of retail shops, is probably the largest change in land use on this scale that we've seen in I don't know how long, but it fundamentally will change the streetscape. And there's always going to be people. I mean, you mentioned I'm on the community board before. It's like anytime you wanted to take away parking for a bike lane, or you wanted to do this, or when someone comes for an application to shut down for a few days a couple of streets to do a street fair, there's people that like it and there's people that don't like it. I think wherever there is the political will, there is a way to make these fundamental changes. And I think outdoor dining, and I've heard from people in like the transportation community that were like, wow, how did, we've been trying to change the streetscape for so long, and all of a sudden the pandemic hit, and now restaurants have reimagined how we're using public space, including the streets and sidewalks, for restaurants, and we love it. Like, what did you do? And listen, I don't know if we did anything necessarily other than we saw an opportunity to help restaurants in the midst of this crisis. And all of a sudden, when people started setting up these beautiful outdoor dining installations and bringing energy and vibrancy back to the city streets that had been so desolate and dark and dirty for months during this pandemic, they go, wow, I really like this new New York. This is something that I would like to become a part of the fabric of our city, part of our city streetscape. So I think outdoor dining can. I think we are going to lose some parking spots. But listen, the reality is most of the parking spots that are being taken over, I believe, and I don't have the exact data on it, are not permanent overnight parking spots. Many of them are metered spots and stuff of that nature. So perhaps fewer people will drive into the city if there's less parking spots. Maybe this is a way of not doing congestion pricing, but reducing the number of cars which come in, which have all different types of societal, economic, and environmental impacts. So I think that, you need to look at what opportunities arise, and then you have to seize the moment. And then there's the political battle, for better or worse. You can call it whatever you want, about what changes are going to be made. And I think the restaurant industry, because we're part of people's everyday lives, is so prominent. But I think obviously tech plays a huge role in this, and all other sectors play a big role in this. What are we going to look like in 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, 15 years? In 20 years, are we going to look back and be like, wow, the city is so much more resilient, so much more livable, and so many of those reasons we are this way is because we seized the moment during the pandemic to build back a better city? Or are we going to look back and be like, oh, that outdoor dining thing was cool, but it's long gone. having fewer cars and less traffic in the streets. That was so cool. I remember when we were closing down streets and you could take your kids out to ride bikes, or you'd see, seniors in the community setting up chairs, playing cards on the street. Like, that was so cool. Like, and we missed the opportunity to really make it a part of the fabric of the city.
Yeah, I hate being the person who adds on, but I just wanted to add one component that I'm very, very excited about that we're not doing is physical kiosk. Just a small example of what people are skipping. Bad ideas are being overlooked, and we need to go ahead and stay true to them. Those kiosks that people have are super expensive. They are also not contactless, multiple people touching them. They never should have existed. I have been trying to ask restaurants to order from phone because these are the virtual kiosk in your pocket. I have been trying to implement that at Bear Burger since 2015.
Yeah.
Right? Like, sit at the table, order food, and food will come to the table. The servers can now focus on talking to you, telling you about food, and not taking your orders and focusing on your 15 allergies. Right? I don't have any allergies, by the way. I'm an immigrant. We have very, very few allergies. Just kidding. Anyways, either way, the point is kiosk is being completely overlooked and skipped. And I think now that every restaurant has digital menus and digital ordering, let's not go back to kiosks because this is so complicated. Let's make this the new. I hate the phrase new normal, but let's make this the new normal. Similarly, let's not go ahead and go back to days where the streets were filled with cars. For some reason, all the cars are still in New York at least for the people who are still here, and we coexist together with restaurants and a fantastic outdoor dining system. So I hope we take the opportunity to go ahead and make it very difficult to revert back.
Definitely there, and I want to make sure we leave some time at the end. So there are some good questions coming through in the chat that we should get to. But before we do that, I just want to ask one more quick question, and we'll move to that. Moving from outdoor dining, we got citywide. We got indoor dining underway, and lasted about a week until indoor dining and outdoor dining in some places had to scale back down in the neighborhood's hotspot zones that we now have those restrictions back in place. Curious to hear from you, Andrew, both of you, if you think that neighborhood by neighborhood approach, area by area approach, where different levels of opening are going to be allowed based on the infection rate in those zones, is that something that we should expect to see for a while? Is that making things more complicated for restaurant owners? How are you facilitating information between the city and the state and maybe your members who are in those zones and trying to figure out what to do?
Yeah, well, listen, let's hope we don't have to continue to deal with this issue. Putting in perspective, restaurants throughout the rest of New York State have been opened at 50% indoor occupancy since back in June. We finally opened up indoors at only 25% occupancy on September 30th. Meanwhile, restaurants have been open since June indoors, and we have continued to see the infection rate go down, which we should all be very thankful for, which says to me that the safety protocols that have been mandated by the state, while they may be tough, they, in some degree, have been working. The governor did reiterate the last week, I guess it was, that the infection rates in these neighborhoods around the state, the two areas in Brooklyn and Queens in particular, were not related to indoor dining or related to restaurants. They were related to other types of activities. So I think that is good in so much that if we continue to follow these protocols, we can hopefully keep and reduce the infection rates. However, we did see these spikes, and there's concern as we go into the fall and the winter, we could continue to see spikes in additional neighborhoods. I think jumping to close down the city again would exacerbate the crisis and create so many other problems. I don't know that that is feasible, and I don't think that would be right. I think we need to look at the best science and the best techniques that are available to us and be willing and able to pivot and modify our approach on the fly to address the facts on the ground. But I do think that looking at hotspots and then reducing the type of activity within those hotspots is the best approach right now. And let's see if we're able to contain it instead of just closing down larger geographic areas where you're basically then shutting down businesses that had nothing to do with the transmission, businesses whose customers may not and workers may not have had anything to do with the transmission, and continue to allow them to operate. It's tough to know what's going to happen as far as increasing from 25% indoor occupancy to 50% indoor occupancy. We had hoped that by November 1st, we could get to 50% indoor occupancy in the city. That was the understanding with Governor Cuomo. Now that we've seen these spikes in these neighborhoods, that of course is very uncertain. If we look over the next 10 days, hopefully they're able to contain the spikes in cases in these neighborhoods, and then we can continue to move to that approach to 50%. Restaurants that had outdoor dining, that got 25%. They were certainly a little better off than restaurants that did not have any outdoor dining and only got 25%. I mean, I know some restaurants that said 25%, I'm not even going to try to open. I need at least 50% to try and open, but important to put it all in perspective. Pre-pandemic, when restaurants had 100% indoor occupancy, it was difficult enough for them to survive. So the occupancy, while it's very important, we should not let the big picture escape us, which is we need the federal government to act, and we need them to act very fast. There's a bill called the Restaurants Act, which is a $120 billion grant program that would help businesses pay for rent, labor, vendor expenses, and all these other expenses that they need. Because, if you haven't paid rent for the past 5 months and you're opened up at 50% occupancy and you're expected to pay 100% of the rent, like, it's just math. It just does not work. So we need the government support. We need to do our best to really focus on where infection rates increase, get them contained, reduced, and hopefully eliminated in those areas, and not just start shutting down the whole entire city, because I think that's going to exacerbate the crisis in so many ways that we can imagine, and probably those that we can't.
Yeah, great. I mean, there are some really great questions in the chat that I'm happy to repeat, but I would invite anyone on the Zoom right now to unmute yourself and ask a question directly to either Nabeel or Andrew. We've got about 10 minutes or so. Yes, Tony, I see you raising your hand. Go ahead.
Hi, everyone. Nabeel mentioned earlier that, we've all had some of our favorite restaurants close, and that's just, the nature of what's happening right now. But Andrew, I'm curious, with that in mind and knowing how the vacancies may change the price of future future restaurant leases. I'm curious if there's any momentum around other permits, like easing the process of getting other permits, like liquor licenses. We all know plenty of restaurateurs that end up opening and it takes them months to get their liquor license. There's just so much red tape. So that's what I'm curious about.
Yeah, so actually we're going to be urging, so there is a bill in the Senate and the Assembly that we have been advocating for, but because who knows when they're going to get back and if things will or will not pass, we're going to be urging Governor Cuomo to sign an executive order to allow restaurants or businesses in the city of New York to basically get a temporary liquor license. Right now, if you were bold enough to open a new restaurant or bar in this environment, it could take you 6 months to get a liquor license. And there's just no way you can hang out that long and just wait 6 months to see whether or not you're going to get a liquor license. Because if you're not going to get it, well, guess what? Then you're not going to open because you're not going to be financially viable. So the rest of the state, when you go, you are able to open up and you can get a temporary license. So that's something that needs to happen at a state level. Let these businesses start operating on a temporary level, on a temporary permit until the state can catch up and process all these licenses, because we need to do everything to help places get up and open fast and not do things that are going to delay and discourage entrepreneurs from investing in the city and opening up new businesses and creating new jobs.
Thanks.
Sorry, I was myself muted. Does anybody else want to jump in with a question? Feel free. If not, I'll just ask one of the ones that came through the chat. A good question here about, one of the concerns people still have with dining indoors is, of course, a lot of the guidance around ventilation and airflow and things like that. The guidance that we've seen come through so far suggests certain upgrades to HVAC and ventilation systems inside establishments to ensure that air quality is good in those places. The question being, how much of the changes and adaptations like that are the responsibility of the restaurant owners versus the responsibility of landlords and building owners who may be offering lease space to restaurants?
So when it comes to the ventilation, often it is the tenant that is installing. I mean, some of the, kind of newer buildings, there may be a relationship, but most experience that I've had speaking with restaurateurs has been that they have access to their HVAC system. So they need to install the MERV 13 or greater filters. Often, as some of you probably know, current HVAC systems won't even fit MERV 13. So there is an ability to meet additional types of requirements. But we've seen all these different standalone units come up that you can basically purchase, you plug them into the wall, and they filter the air and act similar to HVAC. So it's usually it's the responsibility of the restaurant. If you have a particularly good landlord and the business can't help, perhaps the landlord will step in and assist with some of the expenses. But generally, the responsibility is on the restaurant to come into compliance.
Great. Anybody else want to jump in with a question?
Yes, I want to ask about so this is Sneha here. I want to ask about what are your views on air purifying, although the ventilation and everything is on tenants' or the landlord's responsibility. But what about the indoor dining for air purifiers? Are you thinking about it? Because there's been a spike in that area. Like, what's the take of restaurant owners on having an air purifier that would help in COVID?
Yeah, well, I think, yes. So the state they've broken into kind of 3 different classifications, so to speak, for restaurants to comply with the air filtration. One is if you have an air filtration system that fits MERV 13 or greater filters, you have to use that. If you have an air filtration system that does not fit MERV 13 or greater filters, or you don't have access to your air filtration system, there is a list of other air purification requirements you can meet, and they range from keeping windows and doors open to purchasing standalone air purifiers, and there's a whole list of them. So us as an organization, we don't endorse one specific brand or one specific style. We're really looking towards the city, state, and federal government requirements to say, okay, these are how you can meet the requirements, and as long as you do that, you are as okay as possible. I do think putting the regulatory framework aside for a minute, and I think someone may have put it in the chat, just the consumer confidence of going and dining indoors is so important. So I think restaurants would be wise to go above and beyond, which many of them have, just the state requirements to convey a sense of safety to the dining public, to say we have gone above and beyond to ensure our restaurant is safe for our workers and our customers. Because you can see the different demographics and what their dining behavior is. If you tend to be a restaurant with a younger demographic, you may be packed at 25%. But if your demographics of your customer base kind of curves a little bit older, or maybe with families with young kids, they may not be as comfortable eating indoors. And I think we're really going to see how this all shakes out over the next month plus because it's still nice enough for people to eat outdoors. Even if we approve heat lamps, you can eat out in the heat lamps. But as the temperature really drops and when it's raining out, we will start seeing whether many of these same people that have been eating outdoors all summer and during the fall are then still comfortable eating indoors when getting a meal outside maybe isn't ideal because of the weather.
Perfect. Thank you.
Great. I think we have time for just like one more quick rapid fire question.
I have a quick question. My question is just like, something for all of us as people who are going to be dining in restaurants. Andrew and Nabeel, I'm sure you've been to a ton of different outdoor setups, and I'd love to see if you have new recommendations on like the fun, creative, cool outdoor dining setup that you've seen, or places that we should be going to. I'm in Queens specifically, but I'm sure we're all from all 5 boroughs. Just a nice little creative thing for us to think about as we support the restaurant ecosystem.
I'll go first, if you don't mind. And there's this one restaurant called Bear Burger that I've never been to. Has a great outdoor dining program. Do I get paid to say it? Yes. And it's per word. So every time I say Bear Burger, they have to pay me. So I'll say it with one last time. Go to Bear Burger Deadmarsh or 31st Ave. We have our tech there, so I'm not biased at all. You can look at the menu on your phone and order from your phone, right? The food will come to your table, and you can keep ordering food, and it knows your table number already. It can already geo-target where you are. So completely unbiased because that's who I am. And I'll let Andrew go right after me. Oh, Andrew, we can't hear you.
I'll say Bear Burger too, because that means that you pay your membership dues.
Yes.
But no, you're doing a really nice job there. So we partnered with the Rockwell Group, very well known architects, and we've done a couple of these outdoor dining installations. Our president Melba Wilson up on Frederick Douglass has a beautiful outdoor dining setup that was done by the Rockwell Group. You can also go down. We did a full block in Mott Street down in Chinatown, which is amazing. It's actually not dedicated toward one specific restaurant, but it's communal. So you can go to any of the local restaurants, get the food, and go sit down. And it's all socially distant and set up with all the proper safety protocols. We did them out in Elmhurst. I was just up the 3rd Avenue Bid in the Bronx did one on Alexander Avenue. They did a really nice job. You can sit out at like Cité or at Bistro, which is really nice. And there's just so much amazing stuff. I mean, one of my favorite things that I did all throughout the summer with my family is just go into a different neighborhood and just go check it out. I mean, if you go out to Brooklyn, go to Vanderbilt Avenue, there's so much cool stuff out there. And it's amazing what restaurants have been able to set up with no money in the midst of a crisis, scrambling, trying to put stuff together. And I could only imagine when this gets made permanent and things start to get back to not new normal, a little pre-pandemic operations, and hopefully have a little bit of money and they can really invest in these outdoor installations to see what they put out there permanently, because it really does transform the city and creates a more resilient place and a more livable place with a lot of great food and drinks.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. I know we're a little over time, but so I just want to thank Andrew and Nabeel for joining us. Hope you guys obviously think of Tech NYC and think of all of our member companies and all of our colleagues that are on the Zoom today as resources to help you do your work. We, are all sort of in this fight together and happy to do what we can to support the restaurant ecosystem and vice versa. So with that, thank you both. And then thanks to everybody else who joined the call. Stay tuned for an invitation for the next one of these. We're going to have the next one on October 27th, where we'll do exactly the same thing, but talk all things transportation. And with that, we hope to see you all soon and wear a mask.
Thank you.
Thank you.